Hi, I'm Dave Nelson, Senior Acquisitions Editor for Baker Academic and Brazos Press, and I am joined today by John Fesko, who is Professor of Systematic and Historical Theology at Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. And John is the author of several books, including his most recent book with Baker Academic, which is this book, The Need for Creeds Today. This is a book that just came off the presses here a few days ago. John, welcome and congratulations on a very fine new publication.
Oh, thanks so much. It's good to be with you here on this call.
John, tell us how you came about writing this book in the first place. How did you get interested in the creeds and confessions in order to write a book of this nature?
I've taught courses on confessions before, chiefly the Westminster Standards, and I've done a lot of research on that. But then I was asked to give some lectures in general on creeds and confessions, particularly, the biblical case for them, looking at a survey of Reformed confessions, and then, some of the reasons as to why confessionalism has waned. And so as I had that opportunity, I thought, rather than just preparing some outlines, I thought, I really want to kind of document all of this information and see if I can maybe write a book, and then from the book extract the lectures. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I really wanted to get the material out there because, as you know, when you give a lecture, there's so much that's left out of the lecture because you just don't have time.
Sure.
And so you can give those details and put that out in the published form. So that's basically the genesis of these lectures. And so I'm excited to see that material get out there so that people can consider it.
Absolutely. Did anything, as you were writing the book, researching, reflecting upon the need for creeds, the need for confessions, did anything surprise you? Anything pop up that perhaps as you were writing these lectures and getting everything ready, it was new for you as a scholar?
It wasn't so much new as much as it was as I had details filled in of which I was, in a sense, kind of unaware, in that I knew, for example, about the 30 Years' War, or about the English Civil War. But then when I began to look at the numbers and, say the statistics behind those tragic wars, you learn that, say, 250,000 people died, both military and civilian, in the English Civil War. And at that time, that was essentially about, I think it was somewhere around 10% of the English population. And so I began to think, what would happen if in this country, 10% of our population was wiped out by a civil war? And then you begin to feel the weight of that particular event. Or with the 30 Years' War, I knew that it was there. I knew that it had been, a bloody conflict. But at the same time, I didn't realize how bloody it was. And that I didn't understand at the time until I researched it, that it was the bloodiest conflict in world history up until World War I,
Sure.
With some 8 million casualties. And so that was, in one sense, a revelation to me, and I'm grateful to be able to fill that information in. But where that really, I think, impacted me is not only that you see the tragedy of those particular events, and the mayhem and the chaos and the death, but then when you have to sadly connect that to confessional Christians, whether it's parliamentarian or Presbyterian or Royalist and Presbyterian in the English Civil War, or Roman Catholic and Protestant in the 30 Years' War, it's a sobering fact. And so I want to showcase that, not so that we can say, look at how horrible they were, but rather so that we can say, may it never happen again, and that we can learn from the past. So I think those are some of the things that I think were very, I think, revealing in that sense, and they proved to be very instructive.
Yeah, that really comes across too, and thanks for that answer, because that really does come across in the book. It's that connection between the past and the present.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting into the sort of deep historical background for some of the creeds and how they've been used throughout the history of Christian thought, for the sake of understanding what the creeds mean for us today. So the title, The Need for Creeds Today, might suggest that this is just about how maybe today we can simply, use the creeds in worship or what have you. But this is really about connecting the past to the present, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think that right now, there's so many, analysts of culture. Say Jean Twenge, she's a psychologist in San Diego, at University of San Diego, and she's noted, the narcissism epidemic, and how we can also note how highly individualistic Western culture is.
Sure.
And so as I looked at these, I really am hoping to encourage people in the church to say, that the church and Christianity is more than your own personal existence and your own personal experience. And we want to join hands with our ancestors, throughout the ages. And we want to connect with the early church, people in the Middle Ages and early modernity, to say that, there's one faith, the faith once delivered to the saints, as Jude says in his epistle. So that's one of the chief, focal points of the book, is to connect the present with the past, so that hopefully in getting our bearings, we can have some good direction for the future.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a kind of a related question to what you just said there, but maybe getting specific to one trend that certainly in North American Christianity, one catches wind of rather often. And this is, I grew up in the American South, just a state over from where you are right now. And I heard this all the time growing up. No creed but Christ. No creed but the Bible.
Right.
What would you say, and what do you say to Christians, especially in North America, who continue to kind of cling to almost an anti-creedal position, thinking that the creeds somehow represent an authority that is unbecoming to Christian faith? Right. What do you respond? How would you respond to that sort of, and it still goes on today, right? No creeds but Christ. How do you respond to that, John?
On the one hand, I want to say that I understand in a sense where these folks are coming from. They want to guard the exclusive sufficiency and authority of Scripture. So that is, I think, a commendable concern. But on the other hand, I'm also a firm believer in the idea that we're not the first ones to come to these particular questions and issues. And if that's the case, how has the church historically, approached this particular question? And, it comes down to the question of, even if we might claim, hey, no creed but the Bible, or no creed but Christ, there's two, at least, issues that I see with that. First, that small statement in and of itself is a creedal statement.
Right.
So you can't get rid of it. It's there. Sure. Now it's a small one, and it's a little teeny tiny creed. Yeah. But you're expecting everybody to adhere to that kind of doctrinal proposition. Yeah. But then second, the issue is well, what's the Bible? Who is Christ? And as soon as you begin to get into those questions, you very quickly end up having to answer questions that the church has historically, has addressed. And I've seen this over the years, where you see some of these mega churches that are defined by, celebrity pastor. Yeah. And so then they begin to ask the question, as they expand out to multiple sites, how do we preserve our brand?
Sure.
And I want to say, well, that's a very modern way of addressing an old problem, which is, how do we preserve the integrity of what we have professed and what we believe as a body, as a group of people? And so I want to say, the impulse is always there, whether you talk about it in terms of brand consistency, or whether you talk about it in terms of, creedal heritage. And I would say that I would much prefer to talk about creedal heritage, for all of the reasons that we've said before, because at the end of the day, a brand isn't necessarily infused with doctrinal conviction and belief. And so as common as that sentiment is, I would really want to encourage us all to say, hey, let's dig into our past, and let's ask the church throughout the ages on so many different topics what it is that they have professed. It's like I tell my students in church history, when we're talking, say, about the ecumenical creeds, say, for example, Nicaea, Constantinople, the Chalcedon, or Ephesus, affirming these documents is not just simply a question of, oh, that's Roman Catholic or that's something else. I want to say that's basically all of Christendom who affirms these creedal documents. And so to disavow them is to not simply put yourself in a unique Protestant position. It's really to put yourself outside of all of Christendom. And that kind of reality is a very sobering, I think, check upon our beliefs. And so it's so vital, and I think so useful and important for us to make those connections.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. A final question here,
Sure.
and it's one that sort of ties together some of the things you just said to some of the questions or comments that you had earlier on. And it's regarding the public character of the creeds. As you show in the book, the creeds did not, as it were, pop out of thin air, but have all of the creeds and confessions in the history of Christian thought came out of a particular political climate, and there was a public aspect to saying the creed, something that you're doing, you're confessing before your contemporaries. How do you think that aspect of the creedal tradition, what does it say to us today? If your question here in the title is about the need for creeds today, tell us a little about the public character of the creeds in that regard.
Yeah, I think that I'm always reluctant to use words like unprecedented, or perhaps more so now than ever before.
Sure.
You know, I'm enough of a student of history to recognize that, you know, there's some cycles in how all of this unfolds. But, you know, I do want to say that at least in the present, because of the splintering, not only of culture, not only because of the splintering, say, of theological conviction, to have that public confession, to be able for the church, both broadly as well as more narrowly in its various denominational representations, to have that public profession to say, this is what we as a body of believers affirm, this is what we confess, you know, so that anybody, whether inside or outside of the church, can see what the church affirms. I think that this has a couple of benefits for us. Is that one, it's an enduring public witness to the gospel of Christ.
Sure.
You know, so that you can tell people in the outside world, hey, this is what we believe and what we affirm. And it's not only what we believe, but say, as it pertains to say of so many of the Christological statements and so many different creeds and confessions, it goes back to the earliest days of the church. Secondly, it unifies bodies of believers together, and it takes us away from our perhaps splintered mentality to say that this is what I as an individual believe along with this other group of people. You know, it perhaps functions